Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Just had to remember to put my microphone on there. How you all doing? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing good. How are you? How the heck are you? How the heck is everybody out there? Good to see you. How are you, Nala? Good. Good to see you. Good. Everybody here, all the important people here, I'm assuming. Good to be with you. Good to see you. All right. Lots going on tonight. But first and foremost, let me just check something because I always want to check this. Just making sure that you can hear the stuff in the background before we get into the show. Once we get into the show, we've got a lot of video and content for you tonight on a whole range of things. Actually, one is Willie Jackson, the Willie Jackson conversation on Q&A over the weekend. It was an embarrassment, and I think it's another version of, I don't know, someone punching above their weight, perhaps. The music is kind of chill ambient music in the background. Emma said that it's kind of weird. Is that what it is? There's drums and beats and that kind of stuff. Just sort of making sure that's all playing through clearly. I'm assuming that it is. And Emma says the audio is kind of weird. I'm putting it down now just in case you're wondering where it's going, just so people can confirm you can hear that. And then if you can, then we can get on with the night. All right. So yes, also the entrenchment thing that we talked about last week. Of course, you would have heard Chewy and I having debates about it on Tuesday night. That we were both sort of in the position of thinking that the idea of having a protection in place against privatizing water is a great thing. My position was always the Three Waters is it's not that the Three Waters is bad legislation. It's that the way it's been communicated is bad legislation. It's being done poorly, and it's like they were trying to cover a mistake they made with their communication by putting in place bad legislation. So it didn't come out as particularly smart, and I wasn't a huge favour of the entrenchment idea. I think it's fair to say that Chewy was more okay with it, but acknowledged it was a bit of a sledgehammer approach as well. Well, entrenchment is gone. Is it a huge embarrassment for the government, or is it a government and a party listening to people and listening to what they've got to say and acting on it? I think you'll know and you'll remember that we believe that when a party does well, when a party corrects a mistake, we are always one to congratulate that party. We did it just maybe last week, in the last 10 days, when the National Party moved away from getting rid of the 39% top tax rate. We said, well done. You've turned away from it. You've turned around from it. And actually, remember, the thing that we often say about a U-turn is the thing about a U-turn is whilst you don't just have to ignore it like there wasn't an issue in the first place, the opposing view to a U-turn is continuing down the same path in the wrong direction. When we do U-turns, when we're in the car and we do a U-turn, it's because we're driving in the wrong direction. So a U-turn in general can be seen as a good thing. However, it also can be seen as a sign of, why don't you get this right first time? So has the government done a U-turn on the entrenchment? I don't know, but they've certainly removed the entrenchment clause. And because of that, are we applauding them for doing the right thing? Are we using it as a sign of their incompetence? I guess that's to be discussed as well. TVNZ's latest poll. TVNZ's interesting, actually. The poll is not the poll that Labour wants to see before the election. Everyone would agree with that. The trend is very clear for the year, which is Labour dropping, National rising. However, TVNZ has come out. In fact, maybe we'll start with this. TVNZ has come out with quite a strange sort of packaging of the poll, talking about the surge from the right. And the surge that they're talking about is National up 1 percentage point and ACT up 2 percentage points. Now, that's a definite improvement, and it means that they have a more comfortable balance of power if that did equate to seats in the House. But I don't know. I think about surge, and I think about the idea of, I think of water when I hear that word surge, like a wave, a surge. And it's not like a little tiny incremental adjustment more. A surge is a big movement. So TVNZ kind of selling this actively as their headline as a surge in the polls. It's like, well, it's certainly continuing on that trend. It's certainly better news for National and ACT than it is for Labour, but overstating it a little bit, maybe. I'm not saying, by the way, this is saying it's wrong. I think the trend is very clear what's going on there. And also a bit of a different one for you tonight. Kanye West being kicked off Twitter. But I want to explain to you something, and you'll have to bear with me with this, and you'll have to make sure that you kind of hear everything I'm saying and not just make it sound like I'm saying, what Kanye said was fine, because obviously that's not the case. Completely anti-Semitic, completely inappropriate. However, I think pretty clear that there was no call to violence. There was no explicit call to violence. So for Elon Musk to remove him from Twitter for an image, there are some interesting conversations going around at the moment about this idea of Elon Musk being a free speech absolutist, yet we only really need our free speech protected when we say abhorrent things, because abhorrent things are the things that people need to kind of say, hang on, I have the right to say this. If you say lovely things, no one challenges you to get rid of that speech. It's the abhorrent, revolting, horrific things, and it's the politically challenging things. They're the reasons you need legislation to protect free speech. It's not to be nice. You need kind of free speech protections to be a prick, And Kanye West over the weekend was one of the most abhorrent people on Twitter, and he was removed from it. Now, the thing you have to listen carefully for is, I'm not saying he shouldn't have been removed. It's a private business. It's got its right to remove whoever they want. It could cut all ginger people if it wanted to. It's a private business. The thing I'm asking, and the thing we'll look at, and I've got some examples for you, is someone like Elon Musk, who sets himself up as an absolutist, his word, a free speech absolutist. Then when someone uses completely abhorrent speech, he kicks them off Twitter, which is sort of what people like Elon Musk were complaining about before Elon Musk took over Twitter. It's an interesting dynamic. We'll have a look at a bit more details in that as well. And look, I also wanted to actually have a really quick look to start off with, just to let people know and to keep us up to date with what's happening at the COVID numbers. COVID numbers were released today. Officially, there are, I think it was 37,000 or 34,000 cases in the last week. Of course, we also heard last week that the ministry has said maybe only 35% of people are reporting. And if 35% of people are reporting, if that is indeed accurate, and I say if, because maybe now it's 45, maybe it's 50%, I don't know, but this was only last week that they said that 35% of people were reporting. That means you basically need to triple that. That means 100,000 cases in New Zealand last week. That means it goes from, 75 to 35. So that's 5,000 cases a day. It goes from 5,000 cases reported, that if that's only 35%, which is what we were told, it goes to 15,000 cases a day. And look, one of the ways that we track this is we often have a look at the cases in hospital, right? 418. And we track it back to some data from quite a long time ago, where we can have a look when there was 400-ish people in hospital, which, I'll bring my mic with me so you can hear me, which it looks like is about, there was about 400 people there on March the 2nd. So on March the 2nd, February, March the 2nd, there were, between 17 and 19,000 cases a day. You could also go over here to be fair and go over here where there's about 400 people in, which was also, look, there's around here, there's 500 on April 16, 8,000 cases a day. So, there's a pretty big discrepancy there, but I guess what I'm saying is, following the data and having a look around, we should be aware that it's still out there. This was an interesting tweet that went out today. because of course the Prime Minister told us this one thing will be this one thing that will be the same for everyone is this will be the first Christmas and summer holiday in 3 years we haven't had COVID hanging over us. So the PM said that, and of course Twitter, it's Ritangi said, hello, New Zealand Labour. This is not the first Christmas that COVID is not hanging over us. Our case numbers last week were 27,000, or should be at least doubling that to get a true number of infections of 27,000 long COVID cases will be 4,500. And then friend of the show, Anna Brooks says, how are we here? Denying the pandemic exists, pretending that COVID-19 has somehow disappeared. What really bothers me is vulnerable who have been fed this political message that they no longer need to be concerned and now believe this as fact. This is not okay. So somewhere probably, to be fair, between last week, between 70,000, which would be double the numbers reported, and 100,000 cases in the week. So just be aware. We're coming up to Christmas. People will be traveling all over the country. For example, in Dunedin, I'm pretty sure, certainly the last time I looked, BQ1.1 and BQ1 was not in Dunedin yet, but you can be assured that come Christmas with people traveling around the country, it will be. So if you're in a place where COVID isn't quite as rampant, I was speaking to someone today from a business in Auckland who said COVID has wiped out our staff. You know, like they are struggling to fill staff numbers at a media outlet. Excuse me, because COVID numbers were through the roof in that workplace. Just reminding you, just putting it out there, that it's not quite over yet, and maybe for people to still be aware. Okay, people in the chat, we are going to I'm going to ask you one question. I want you to respond to this in the chat as well. It's a nothing question, but I'm interested in your thought because you're probably smarter than me. So I saw this advert as I was driving down the road, I think today or yesterday. It's from Spates, and it says 75% less carbs, full flavor, right? This is from Spates. This is not an advert, by the way. I'm just wondering. Now, my question is, I'm a bit of a stickler in my own life, in my kids' life. That's about it. I never correct people when I'm out and about. But the difference between less and fewer. Are you the same? Are you a stickler in an area somewhere? Now, if you are a stickler, then explain to me, is this correct? 75% less carbs. Is that correct? Because what I always understood was if you can count it, it's fewer. If you can't count it, it's less. So in other words, if you can count the number of carbs, it should be fewer. And I was thinking, if they say this has 75% less of something, then doesn't that mean you need to be able to quantify it or count it to now know that there's 75% less? And if that is the case, does that not mean it should be fewer? I don't know this. I'm putting this out there, and I'm wondering if you have an idea around this, if you're smarter than me and understand the language better. Because you say that it could be, let's say it was bottles. It would be 75% fewer bottles because you can count the bottles, but you would be 75% less drunk because you can't count drunk. So this is nothing to do with tonight. It's something I put up on Twitter today, and I'm just interested to see what you guys think. If you're in the wordsmith world, then I'd like to get your feedback on that. Is it less carbs or fewer carbs? Can you count the carbs? And if you can't count the carbs, how do we get the number 75% less? In other words, if the pizza's 3/4 less number of slices, if it's 3/4 the size, it's because you can count the numbers of the numbers of slices of pizza that have gone. If it's 75% less pizza, doesn't that therefore mean you can see the pizza was there and now it's 75% less? Anyway, just wondering. I'm not saying they're wrong. Don't have a clue, but I'm generally wrong on these things, but I want to kind of try and figure out how I am. So can you count carbs or not? And if you can, should it be less or should it be fewer? These are the big questions we ask in Big Hairy News. Right, where did I say we'd start? Let's start with a poll, eh? Let's start with a poll. Where is the poll? I've got lots of tabs open. Now, I've already played that music to make sure the audio is playing, but if for some reason it decides not to right now, let me know and I will sort it out straight away, but I'm assuming this is all going to be fine. So here is the headline. As you can see, ACT National surge in the latest One News Kantar public poll. Surge. That's surging. It's a big movement. In fact, I should look up what the dictionary definition of surge is. So let's have a listen to what the poll's all about. So look, there we go. There's the surge. National up 1, ACT up 2. I mean, I think the word trending up is correct because they've gone up. But is it? Oh, don't say no sound. Oh, how can we have no sound here? But there was sound with music, unless you guys are just messing with me. Okay, here we go. I've got to go back in again. I'll do it again and it will work. My apologies. Stop that. Share that. Click on that. That one. Share. It will work now because that's the thing I got to do. Here we go again. Confirm for me, please. And then someone said sound is back. Oh my goodness. I actually don't know what's going on now because some people are saying no sound. Some people are saying sound is back. If you guys are messing with me, that's not helpful.
As the summer break beckons, here's how the political parties are looking. National is on 38, up 1 from our last poll 2 months ago. Labour is on 33, dipping 1. ACT is on 11, up 2. The Greens are once again steady on 9, and New Zealand First has gone up to 4.
So there we go. As I was saying, National up 1, ACT up 2. Is it a surge? Is it not a surge? Is it a trend up? I think trending up is correct because Labour is certainly trending down. I don't know. I'm being pedantic, I guess, I know. But when we think about what the media is doing, so if you only saw the headline, right, that National ACT is surging and you didn't see anything else, you're like, well, that means they're doing very, very, very well compared to last time. And I'm like, well, within the margin of error, 1 or 2, it's good. It's better than going the other way. But surge? Just a ponderance.
Nudging at the 5% needed to get back into Parliament. Let's look at some of the other parties now. Te Pāti Māori is steady on 2. The Opportunities Party top gets 2 as well, and the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party and the New Conservative Party are both on 1. One thing to note, 11% don't know or refuse to say how they'd vote. Let's come over here now and look at how these numbers translate to seats in Parliament.
Now, this is interesting.
National gets 49 seats, all of these ones here in blue. Add in 15 from ACT and you get 64, above the 61 needed to govern. A comfortable majority, meaning National and ACT would be in charge. Now, looking at the other side. Even if you add together 3 seats from Te Pāti Māori, those 11 Green seats over there, and 42 from Labour, you only get 56.
So here's a question, and I'm going to investigate this because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So ACT is on 11% and the Greens are on 9%. So they're within, what is that, 20% of each other? Is that about right? Yet the Greens get 11 seats and ACT get 15. That seems disproportionately high for ACT. Is that, my question out loud, which I'll look for the answer to, my question out loud is that how much more winning a seat actually gives you as well? But mind you, Chloe won Central Auckland, so they both won a seat. It feels like 11% for 15 seats is disproportionately high compared to 9% for 11 seats. Or am I wrong? Is my maths out there? That's just how it doesn't feel, because that's basically, then they're not far off 2/3 different. If it was 10 and 15, it would be two-thirds, but they're not 2/3 apart between 9 and 11. That's what I'm saying.
Not enough to hold power. Let's bring up the preferred Prime Minister numbers now. Who do people want to see at the helm? Jacinda Ardern is on 29, down 1 from our last poll. Christopher Luxon gets 23, up 2. David Seymour is on 6, and both Winston Peters and Green MP Chloe Swarbrick are sitting on 2.
Now, this is the other thing, yeah? This is how the media can change and manipulate a story the way they want to sell the headline. So this poll, right? The headline for the poll, which as you can see reads National ACT surge in latest One News Kantar public poll. Which is, I mean, the word surge may not be accurate, but it's accurate to say that they've gone up. The headline for the story could have also been Jacinda Ardern, most popular Prime Minister in the country, or most popular what do they say? The most popular, whatever the word is, most preferred prime minister in the country. Still the most preferred prime minister in country for whatever it is, 15 straight polls. That would have also been an accurate title. Not saying it would have been the best title, but there's always this grain of salt as to how the polls are sold within the media outlet. And I've been having a fantastic conversation online tonight with some people talking about the, how much the media is bought out by the government, the morons who think that. But you can see really clearly if this media wanted to spin this positively for Labor, they could. They could talk about a margin of error difference for the incremental difference by national. They could talk about how the prime minister is still the top choice, and they've done none of those things. They've made an editorial choice. None of those things. The editorial choice TVNZ made tonight was to say that the right, by getting between 1% and 2%, is surging. That's the editorial response that was made by the publicly funded TVNZ.
Both on the lower end of the scale, but most political parties now have someone on that preferred prime minister list. So those are the big numbers from our last poll ahead of election year.
That's a fine specimen. I think we're going to start it at $700.
Christopher Luxon auctioning off this prized sheep known as a poll Dorset. But there's another poll on his mind.
This is showing New Zealanders feel the country's going in the wrong direction. They want a turnaround and they want a government to be able to get things done.
The fallout around the death of dairy worker Janak Patel, the Three Waters debacle, and turbulent economic times have seen the gap widen between the left and right blocs.
As a government, our focus is on addressing those and demonstrating that we hear the concerns New Zealanders have.
None of it has improved over the last 5 years, and Kiwis are rightly frustrated.
They just don't listen.
A lot can change in the final months leading up to an election.
This is really interesting. Winston Peters is really interesting. When I say really interesting, it's interesting that he would make his way back. I mean, would he get into power, as in make it back into government? It makes it harder for the left to get in. Many out there will be celebrating that. But it makes it for an interesting dynamic. And if there's one person, and I think David Seymour was about to allude to this, if there's one person that would flip on a coin and put Labor back in, it's probably Winston Peters, if it saw a benefit to him personally.
Winston Peters. We talked to him on the hustings in Hastings yesterday.
It's wall to wall, and we've got to keep on doing that in hundreds of halls around this country.
In a non-election year, 4 is a strong number for a party not even in Parliament anymore.
Experience, common sense, and certainty is what New Zealand First brings in spades.
The solution to the problem is not the guy that created all these problems by putting Labor in power.
I think having a 4% wasted vote on the right is probably a good thing overall.
He's kind of centre, isn't he?
No.
National says it's preparing for government.
I can tell you, Jessica, we're not getting into coalition conversations, but I can tell you Nicola's going to be a great finance minister.
David Seymour cruising into today's interview, insisting his heart's not set on a ministerial limo.
ACT's real superpower is the ability to turn down the status, focus on the policy achievement.
Jacinda Ardern says the public hasn't been given a chance to inspect the alternative.
You see us as a government coming forward.
Which is true. And I mean, I'm not saying the Prime Minister is saying this from a defensive point of view, because the job of the opposition is to say they're bad. I know it sounds horrible me saying that out loud, like it's like I'm kind of saying, oh, they're no good. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the job of the actual opposition is not to say here are our policies. It basically is to say the government's policies don't work, and they release their policies as they go on over the next 12 months. So the Prime Minister is right here, but she's also right. When I say right, I mean correct. It's not a criticism per se, because that's what opposition parties do. It's not the opposition parties to make legislation. It's the government's job to make legislation. It's the opposition party's job to critique that legislation. And in the year leading up to the election, it's the opposition's party's job to basically complain about every bit of legislation.
With ideas and proposals to take on those challenges. Contrast that, of course, to the alternative. The opposition has not produced those ideas. Our job is to crack on.
It just wasn't the Christmas poll she was hoping for.
And Jess is with us now live. This is, of course, our sixth poll for 2022. Talk us through the trend for the year and why this latest one is so significant.
Well, these numbers are the worst that Jacinda Ardern has seen since she's in power. What they show is that National and ACT can comfortably form a majority. In our last poll, they could form a government too, but they were only just scraping in with one seat. So this is a lot more comfortable. What this shows for Labour is a real downward trend over the year. So what they've got to do now is not only halt that downward trend, but try and claw back some of that support and turn those numbers around. And what they've been doing so far hasn't been working.
Oh, crumbs. Hasn't been working. It cut out on me. So let's get out of there. Yeah, all true at the end, very much. And that's the thing about watching media talk about politics. I'm not suggesting that TVNZ has a right-wing like bias. Obviously not. But it's still really important to understand when a headline is written as an editorial decision. As much as people complain about public funding in TVNZ, it's still a commercial entity, because how it works is TVNZ gets given a lump sum of money, and then there is an expectation that they will give back a return, meaning a dividend back again. Now, it's been said in the last, I think, 18 months, thanks to COVID and the adpocalypse, that there's not going to be a return in the foreseeable future, but they're still running it as a commercial entity, which still means clickbait works. They need to get people clicking on their stories. They need to get audience. So saying that the right is surging is a better headline than saying the current prime minister is still the preferred prime minister by the majority of New Zealanders, the biggest slice of the pie. So it's always just good to remember what the thing is. Now, where you wouldn't expect to see that is probably RNZ. And I really do hope, I'll put my cards on the table, I hope with this merger, and we're going to talk a bit about the merger tonight between RNZ and TVNZ, we do get a more BBC style, I've been saying this since day one, a more BBC style broadcaster, a non-commercial TV one that doesn't have to worry about the clickbaits, that doesn't have to worry about survey results, that doesn't have to worry about a dividend, that just has to worry about the news and the stories around New Zealand. Doesn't matter if it's only going to 10,000 people because it's a minority group. It doesn't matter. None of those things matter, right? TV2 can still be commercialized. And of course, RNZ is already a public broadcaster like we see around the rest of the world. I really think that would be advantageous for our democracy to see a independent, publicly funded, non-commercial at all TVNZ, or TV1, if I'm being honest. TV2s, keep that commercial, because you probably still get a dividend back from TV2. Any of those commercial programs that are currently on TV1 put across to TV2. What that would actually also mean is you would have a rip-roaring TV2, because you'd have all the best programs from TV1 and all the best programs, the commercial programs from TV2, put into one channel. It'd almost be like TV in the 80s when there was only two choices, which means you got the best of the best. You'd probably get that pretty much all on TV2. Right, now we've or maybe we just go straight into Willie Jackson, because he was talking about the merger and stuff. No, let's not. Let's talk about entrenchment. There's a couple of things around entrenchment. Let's talk about that. You know that from last week. Look, and I'm sorry because I'm here by myself tonight, so there's not going to be an opportunity for me to get to it, to be able to read heaps of the text. When I play video, I'll read the text. Here we go. Here's one. Simon says, I'm at the Labour Party support. I'm on the Labour Party support. I'm more concerned about New Zealand first. They actually take votes off Labour. Just lots of people saying hello, free soul. Lots and 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 lots. ACT and National have been in the news every day. Yeah, but Jack, so is Labour. I mean, maybe Labour hasn't been in there. Well, this is the other thing. It's very easy to be an opposition party and be received better by the media because you're not responsible for any legislation. You know, when Labour cocks up or the New Zealand government cocks up, if it's a coalition, then they get held accountable or they get hauled over the coals. If you're basically sitting in oppositional seats throwing stones, there's not too much that you can be held accountable for. So it's actually, I think, quite hard for any government, which is why this is how I've always described it. I don't know if you've ever said this on this show, but I'll say it now. I've always kind of held my hands up like this. And for those people that are listening to the audio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, my hands are about the width of my head and moving parallel left and to the right. What happens is parties to get elected typically move towards the center, right? And then when they get elected, they then start to move back to their natural position, Generally, it actually feels a little bit different post-COVID, but technically, so in other words, National Labour will win, and then they'll move towards the left, and as they're moving towards the left, National will come towards the centre. Then they'll win, and then they'll move towards the right, and as they're moving towards the right, Labour will move towards the centre. And then they'll win, and then they'll move towards the left, and this is sort of what happens historically over the last, let's say, 40 years. As I say, it's a bit different now, perhaps because of the trend set primarily in America with alt-right success, etc., etc., etc. But that's been typically what's happened. So, even with COVID, Jacinda Ardern saying, I'm going to be a prime minister for all people, and, it'll be a steady hand, all that kind of stuff. When they could have got through and done a ton of things, they moved back towards the centre. Now, I know that there's a lot of complaints around it at the moment based around, alleged issues around COVID and authoritarian and that kind of stuff. And I do think that there's probably a different vibe at the moment, because I would say that the right, National and ACT are probably getting the success being over on the right, not needing to come back to centre. But maybe that's because Labour's, most people are seeing, have moved towards the right themselves. If you look on Political Compass, Labour is sort of a centre smidge over onto the right side, whereas National's further to the right and ACT's far to the right. So maybe that's why. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's have a look at the entrenchment clause when it comes to Three Waters. Three Waters government announced it would reform entrenchment clause. It would remove, the entrenchment clause from the legislation. Christopher Hipkins has admitted Labor had made a mistake with the entrenchment clause in its Three Waters legislation. The Leader of the House announced the government would fix the water service entities bill this week by removing the entrenchment clause that was voted on during committee stages. The provision in Three Waters legislation would make it more difficult to privatise water assets. Hipkins says it was a mistake to put the clause in. The intention to protect assets from being sold was right, but entrenchment usually requires a supermajority of 75% of Parliament to vote for it, he said. Now, often there's some criticism, and I'll say of the right in America, of getting together and doing their talking points every morning and making sure everyone's on the same page. That's often said as a criticism. Just think what Christopher Hipkins has said. He said it was a mistake. He said the intention was to protect assets when being sold was correct. He says entrenchment usually requires a majority of 75% of the Parliament to vote for it. He said these three things. We're going to move now to a conversation with the Prime Minister on the AM show this morning for a couple of reasons. One is she's talking about entrenchment and the situation. Two is, again, talking about how the media treat these stories. It's very interesting to see, and I've said before that Ryan Bridge has just completely chosen to not hide his disdain for the Labour Party anymore, and potentially for the Prime Minister as well. So let's have a listen to the Prime Minister talking to Ryan Bridge on the AM show about entrenchment. The first thing she does is, remember what we've just said, that, what did Christopher Hipkins say again? Let's say the things. It was a mistake. The intent to protect assets from being sold was right, and it usually requires a 75% or seat majority. Now the Prime Minister is explaining what happened over the weekend with the removal of the entrenchment.
I think, though, here the most important thing is that regardless, we're taking ownership of this as a team. It was an SOP that came from another party, but we as a team, when it came before the House, voted in favour of it. We agree that was a mistake, not because of the subject matter. We don't want to privatise water assets, but because of the use of entrenchment. Entrenchment, and we've talked about this, is commonly understood to be where you embed a supermajority to change anything. Our view is that, yes, actually, we should have some guardrails where and when that's used. So we'll be fixing it and removing those provisions.
Okay. I mean, maybe it's supposed to sound similar because I was talking about it, but I just wonder how that phone call went around maybe this morning. Right. Ryan Bridge presses the Prime Minister on how the mistake was made. So this was a mistake. How was the mistake made?
It's important for people at home to know, was this just, incompetence, negligence? Was there something Machiavellian going on here that you did know about the provision, but you're now claiming?
Sometimes these things are much more Sometimes these things are actually just simple. A mistake was made. I've also referenced the point that entrenchment is generally understood to be 75%, a supermajority. The provision that went before the House was 60%. It was a novel approach. Regardless, our view is that using that provision. We do need to be cautious about when that happens. And so that's why we're fixing it. It's also why, Ryan, we've proposed that in the future it would be useful for all parties in Parliament to come together and have a discussion around when those kinds of provisions come up. Because now we've seen a situation where the threshold has been dropped and it's been put before Parliament.
But you did that. This is the point. You did that, and we still don't know how it happened. So in order to stop this from happening again, shouldn't we find out what happened?
Couple of things, yeah. The first thing is, within this kind of conversation, you guys, it sounds a bit patronizing, we're all lucky that we run a situation that when we have a conversation with someone, 99 times out of 100, we never have to cut them short. There's been a couple of instances where someone's had 10 minutes and we've had to jump in and get the questions out there. But because of how we run this, we are able to have long conversations, let people finish their sentences. But I guess I want to be fair to Mr. Bridge and say, if you've got the Prime Minister for 10 minutes or any person for a 10-minute window, sometimes you do need to jump in. It does, to me, feel to be a bit more venom with some of these questions. Now, my question to you is, do we need to know how this mistake was made? Is that something that's important to know? The Prime Minister has just said it was just a mistake. Do we need to know more? Yes or no? I get the feeling that it's always good to understand how a mistake was made, but there are, I acknowledge also sometimes mistakes being made with really no explanation. You know, I'm building a deck at the moment. I screwed up a couple of the nuts going in or the screws going in, and I burned them. I guess I could figure out how I did it, but actually until I delve into it, I don't really know. I made a mistake. I pressed the wrong way. Not sure. We'll go on.
Again, Ryan, here, again, I think it is important to point out this was not a change or an amendment that was drafted by the government or by a minister. It was from another party.
Did you read it?
That is frequent.
Like, yeah, I know, but you would have read it, right?
And you'll know. I think the context is useful, Ryan, because, again, I think actually the context helps a little bit. When we have a number of amendments that will come through from other parties, a number of them. For any given bill, there could be, well over a couple of dozen. In some cases, depending on the bill, if it's controversial, there can be hundreds. So this was put forward by another party. Yes, we voted in favour of it. Our view is we shouldn't have done that. We are fixing it, and in fact, we're doing it in quite a speedy way. Usually these fixes can take a long time. Because the debate on the bill is not finished, it will probably take an hour.
Okay.
It needs to be fixed, and that's what we're doing.
So, and remember again, I'll remind you if you're just joining us, that when Christopher Luxon turned away from their top tax rate change, on this show, certainly I, sat here and congratulated him for changing his position. Changing your position should never be derided if it's the right thing to do. Now, there can be intentions behind that. We may not get the full reason as to why they changed. Like, I feel that Mr. Luxon probably moved away from it because it wasn't particularly polling well. That's probably why Mr. Luxon turned away from it. But for whatever reason, he turned away from it. Now, I suspect that with Labor, it's probably the same thing, that perhaps they're not doing this just because they realize it was a mistake, but because of the backlash. But for whatever reason, they've turned away from it, and that's the good result for us. So on many levels, I think it's always important that when someone turns away from a bad idea to say, well done for turning away from the bad idea. I guess what Ryan Bridge is doing is now trying to understand why you turned away from that bad idea. And that's important to Ryan. I guess it's important in general as well, but that's what he's doing. So this is one of the points I wanted to show you. This is only 20 seconds, but this is the point where you see the interrupting side of Ryan Bridge. And I guess I would ask to you, is this an appropriate response from an interviewer? Is this too much, or is this still someone needing to get their question answered and get in there and nail someone down who's maybe not giving you the answer that you want?
Right, but just to be clear, you thought you were voting for 75% in the caucus meeting, and
no,
even it's
again.
Oh, okay.
Ryan, I don't want you to extrapolate out. The point I'm making is entrenchment is commonly understood to be 75%. What went before Parliament was separate to that. We accept entrenchment should be really used. It was a mistake. We're fixing it.
So, so to be clear again, what's happened is I got it after the first time she said it. I don't know whether Ryan Bridge actually got it or he was being purposefully dumb here. And in other words, he knew it, because she was saying it's normally 75%. In this instance, it wasn't. And Ryan kept saying, so you wanted it to be 75%. And she was like, don't extrapolate, which I think is a good response. Now's the moment where I think you can see the Prime Minister's had enough. And I don't think I've ever heard a politician talk to a broadcaster like this as well. So I guess if we're saying, is it appropriate for Ryan Bridge to talk to a politician like this, you got to also ask, is it appropriate for a politician to respond to a journalist like this as well? But she's obviously had enough, and she has a crack.
Again, if we want to make sure that we are supporting New Zealanders through this rough period, getting rid of our public service broadcast.
Sorry, I should have also said this has now moved into a conversation around the merger and money between TVNZ and RNZ.
Or having Radio New Zealand collapse doesn't help them, and it actually doesn't help New
RNZ,
Zealand.
how close is RNZ to collapse?
If I can finish my answer, Ryan, New Zealanders absolutely need to know that their government is focused on them, which is why our core Crown spending relative to GDP is decreasing. We are tightening our belt. It has gone from 34% down to 31%, because we're asking New Zealanders to come through this tough time. We have to make sure we're prepared for it too. But would New Zealanders thank us for at the same time letting our public broadcasters collapse? No. We have to make sure that we still are able to make sure that people have access to news and information, whilst also supporting them through a cost of living crisis. We can do both, and that is absolutely what we're doing, and we are cutting our cloth.
So there you go. So we're going to now move into another part of the conversation, which is actually from TVNZ again, but it's from TVNZ's Q&A show, because they talk a lot about the merger. So that was a conversation that started about the merger, and now we're going to continue on into talking about the merger. Now, the conversation from Ryan Bridge was, he talked about Moira. Moira's only worried about obviously had someone on the show earlier. Moira's only worried about the cost of living, telling her that there's going to be, $100 million spent on this merger. How does that help? And I actually think that it's a stupid question, because I think public broadcaster is unbelievably important, and they're not mutually exclusive. It's not like, well, we're not going to work on the cost of living at all. We're only going to work on the broadcast merger. You can do both. You can do both. So yeah, Moira doesn't get it, wherever Moira was from, that there's $100 million being spent on that. But Moira doesn't get a lot of thing out of what do we get? 95 or $125 billion GDP, whatever it is. I can't think off the top of my head what it is. So that part of the conversation is silly. I actually think the conversation we're about to go into, where Jack Tame talks to Willie Jackson about trust, is a bit silly as well, because the premise of it is there are some people out there who, because the government gives money to journalists, to journalist companies, they now don't trust those journalistic companies. What can we do about that? Now, in my opinion, it's like, fuck them, nothing, because it's ludicrous. And I was just having a conversation on Facebook tonight. It was fun. And the conversation was about, and all I said back to the person I was talking to in this Facebook group was, look, let's say this: Three Waters, entrenchment, cost of living, ram raids, dairy owners getting murdered, Hamilton West, or is it East, wherever that by-election is. Do I need to go on about the things that the Labour Party is being smashed for in the media in the last few months? I'm like, well, and I said on this Facebook group, look, I'll give you these as an example. I was quite polite, and I said, look, if you can show that, that's a really interesting story. Here's some examples of why I don't see it. Now, show me the examples of why you do see, the evil media being bought off by the government and being their voice piece. And of course, they couldn't show any because there aren't any, because it's utterly nonsense. So on one hand, when Jack Tame starts to talk to Willie Jackson about how do we build trust back up in these people, I'm like, you if they're wearing a tinfoil hat, there's very little you can do to bring them on board. And actually, what you do as a broadcaster is you be fair. And I hope what we do here is be fair. We're overtly and actively portray and pitch ourselves as sitting on the left. I didn't mean to shock you saying that out loud, but we sit on the left. That's where we sit politically, but we walk and chew gum at the same time. And when the right warrants praise, we give it. And when the left warrants criticism, we give that too. like we're doing around this entrenchment thing. In fact, tonight, it's quite a bit of criticism about Labor, including the criticism of Willie Jackson coming up now as well. But the point I wanted to make about this next interview is I don't think the question line from Jack Tame is particularly useful. I often wonder, because we don't have access to these people very much, I often wonder why these journalists waste their opportunities. And whilst it wasn't a bad interview, it was a good interview overall, it's like, how do we convince these lunatics who think that there's pedophilia happening in pizza parlors and that Democrats are drinking the blood of people, and that, you know, every time a cent goes into a media outlet, you know, Labor wants to see a return for that cent and a positive message of them. How can we convince them that that's not the case? The answer is, well, you can't. So what you do is you do good journalism and you do good reporting. And when people say, well, you're biased, you kind of go, well, we sit on the left, or probably a media agency wouldn't say that with any brains. You say, but actually, you know, we're currently criticizing the left in this commentary, and we actually praised the right last week, talking about them dropping the top 39% tax rate, about not dropping it. So yeah, you don't need to convince them, you just do, and you just be. So now that I've got that off my chest, because I was a bit frustrated about that, talking about, you know, how do we get the trust back? It's like, well, the reason the trust was lost was because most of these people are conspiracy theorists who want to think that the lefty boogeyman is sitting sitting off stage directing all the people what to say, and it's just not true. And if you think it is true and you're watching this, get on our YouTube account, get on our Facebook page, and just message me the examples of how this bought and paid for media, quote unquote, has been so good to Labor. Because I've just listed off about 6 or 7, and I'm not even saying that they've been bad, but they've been pointing out all the foibles, right? Just point it out, including tonight, TVNZ talking about the right surging when they're not surging. They're incrementally on an upswing. They're doing a little bit better than last time, but there's no surge there. That says to me that that's not yay Labor. That's an editorial decision to actually say, in that one instance, not the whole station, yay on the right. Right, Willie Jackson on Q&A over the weekend, he talked about a little bit at the start about the Public Interest Journalism Fund and this question of trust from Jack Tame.
What has the public response to the Public Interest Journalism Fund taught you about public trust in publicly funded journalism?
No, so that's a good question. It tells me that people who haven't been receiving funds, who lost support, were very grateful, were very supportive of the funds coming that way. I've seen that at the coalface in terms of Māori.
I'm talking about perception in the government, though. You're talking about supporting the industry. Yeah, but I mean, you've said that trust is the fundamental issue.
Yes.
And so I want to know what's happened to public trust in media, especially through those media organisations that have received government money.
Well, one of the perceptions, if I'm hearing you right, is that the view is that the government might be paying off the media.
You agree that that's a perception?
That's one of the views that was pushed our way. It didn't matter what we said, it didn't matter how we responded. This is about Jackson and them paying off their mates. Well, it never was. It was about us supporting communities and organisations who deserve support. That's why the collective bargaining strategy is so important.
But perception when it comes to trust is just as important as the reality, is it not?
I disagree with that statement. Perception when it comes to trust is just as important as the reality. No, I don't agree with that. Whether my partner trusts me, is more important than any perception of trust between me and my partner, or you and your partner, or whatever. So I understand what Jack's saying, which is perception is reality, but actually I don't agree with the blanket statement that perception is as important as trust, right? Perception is important, trust is more important. But again, in this situation, I've talked to you numerous times about this thing called motivated cognition. And you guys know what it is by now. Motivated cognition is where someone has a predetermined outcome, and when you provide them with evidence to say that that predetermined outcome is not correct, they find a different path to exactly the same outcome. So I'll tell you something funny, actually. I heard the other day someone tell me a story about one of their anti-vaxxer friends, and there's a common conversation going through the group of anti-vaxxer friends at the moment that because not many people are dying from the vaccine, right? it doesn't mean that people don't die from the vaccine. It means that we must have a weaker vaccine in New Zealand than the rest of the world. So these people, this motivated cognition, have gone from their presupposed outcome, because of what they've been told by the instigators, is that vaccines kill people. But the evidence has been put in front of them that all of their friends and family that have been given the vaccine, none of them have died. And no one really that they know of has died, other than one or two very tragic stories. So rather than going, oh, my outcome must be wrong, that it's not as dangerous as I've been told, they've found a different path to the same outcome. In other words, it is just as dangerous in the rest of the world. So the only logical conclusion is that we mustn't have a stronger strain of vaccine in New Zealand. Motivated cognition gets them there. They change the thing. So back to this trust thing, the motivated cognition issue is that there's nothing you can do for the people who don't trust based on this idea that the government's giving someone money. So there's actually nothing you can do. Literally nothing you can do. They'll just find a different path to the same outcome that their predetermined outcome.
No, sometimes perception is completely wrong. You know?
I'm not asking if it's right or wrong, but I'm saying it's just as important. When it comes to an issue of trust, perception is just as important as the reality. So whether or not,
sure if I agree with you on that, Jack.
Okay, so
there's a lot of perceptions that people have.
So you're not concerned that many people would look at, say, this show, for example, and say that received money from the Public Interest Journalism Fund. I don't trust that show anymore.
Yeah, no, I am concerned about that because we have.
Am I naive to say I'm not concerned about that? Like, am I naive? Because I guess I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing you can do about those people. And the only way that you can get their trust back, because it's been taken by a bunch of scam artists and snake oil salesmen, is to either demonstrate it to them or sadly, I don't want to see this happen, cut them loose. So am I wrong to think that I don't care about getting those people back? Not because I don't want them back, but just because I'm aware that once the tinfoil hat is on, how difficult it is to get in. And I sometimes think about the amount of effort one has to put out to get to someone. And if you've got 100 people in front of you, do you focus 90% of your effort on the 10 people who are already there and it's going to be unbelievably hard to get back? Or do you focus, the 100% on the 90 other people who are already who haven't got this thing put in their head and are already ready to receive new information and learn and understand and move forward as a community together? Maybe that sounds really cold-hearted and harsh, but I might be missing something, yeah? But, I mean, Willie Jackson, Minister of Broadcasting, says he does care that people don't trust, for example, Q&A. Should we care? I mean, or is it just a losing battle?
We've got that type of complaint. Doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't matter the history we give in terms of funding shows like this. There's one view of this is about Willie Jackson paying off Jack Tame. I get that. I get that. But you're never going to change some of those perceptions. The truth is something different.
The truth is, I mean, so you put 50 million in through the Public Interest Journalism Fund. You're going to put 109 million in new funding every year for the new entity. How is that going to improve trust?
Well, we'll put it this way. The 50 million and 2.
It's not. I think I'm done with this trust conversation. It's not going to improve trust. What's going to improve trust is actually people coming out of their cults and people and being shown that journalists are playing an even hand. So, I mean, the question about how will that money increase trust? It won't. The only thing that will increase trust. I mean, I've worked in the past and I've been involved in the past with people in cults, right? It's been something that I've had kind of a bit of a passion and a bit of a hobby about. To get someone out of a cult, it's a lot of hard work, but not until you get them out that can you then start feeding in good and proper information to them, and allowing them to see the truth of things. So the $50 million going or the $100 million going into public broadcasting is not going to do that. Actually, the best way to get someone out of a cult is through personal relationship and family members. That's the best way. And then good information can go in. All right, some more with Willie. Willie is still talking, actually. I see on my list here about trusting in the media. This is also a part where he starts to, I didn't mean to freeze frame on that face. I apologize, Minister. But this is also where he starts to get a little bit grumpy with Mr. Tame. And this is some of the commentary that's been talked about in the last 48 hours, including, I think, the Prime Minister saying that she'd had a talk with Mr. Jackson about this conversation.
Over the course of this program, you have inadvertently undermine trust in the House when it comes to RNZ and TVNZ. And you said that you'd misspoken, so it's really important to note that. But you've publicly pressured one of the organisations, namely Te Reo Tātaki, about a change in culture.
Are you talking about yourselves?
No, you've chosen an entity structure that is arguably less independent than RNZ and TVNZ are today. Your establishment board hasn't publicised its working so far. You haven't released an unredacted business case or the legal advice explaining why.
Just remember, this is supposed to be the government board off, media, giving them a hard time. To the minister's face. These board off guys, wink, wink.
How can you possibly expect the New Zealand public to trust whatever entity resolves?
Listen to what the submitters say in terms of the select committee. 60 to 70% of the...
Terrible answer, by the way. How can you bring this trust back in? Listen to the people who have made submissions. People who have made submissions don't mean anything, because you have lobby groups and pro and con people doing it all the time. The submitters aren't evidence for why it's trustworthy.
Submitters support the entity. They want a few changes, particularly around the editorial side. You're doing a very... You're doing such a negative interview today. I'm very disappointed in you. But you're hammering every part of this entity that's all about our public identity. It's about expression in terms of the New Zealand voice. Don't you want to hear that? You guys...
fundamentally, the submissions may have supported the concept of an entity.
60 to 70%.
It's how you've structured it through this bill that they have.
Well, we're not finished yet, Jack.
Okay,
we've got the select committee coming back.
You've just drawn on the select committee. So this is from Koi 2.
I think you can tell Minister Jackson's not very happy either. Every time he goes, it just feels like he's like going, oh. Feels like the polite mainstream broadcast version of, oh, fuck, to me.
The Centre for Informed Futures, a neutral, I think we would agree, arbiter in this situation. Quote, the bill lacks mechanisms to generate vital public trust. This includes robust representative governance and oversight that guarantees demonstrable independence and freedom from influence. That's a massive concern.
Well, as I said, we've heard it all. You haven't heard the select committee report
back. But you said you're going to keep the autonomous Crown entity structure.
Oh, absolutely, because the focus has to be on non-commercial, on not being commercial, and the ACE fairly represents that.
What guarantees are there that funding will be maintained for the entity across different political cycles?
Well, again, look, sorry, I like Jack. I've had him on the podcast a couple of times, but it's a ridiculous question. What guarantees do you have that National will keep the funding in place? But then again, Willie Jackson dances. The answer is, well, none. This is the answer that Willie Jackson should have given. The guarantee is you put Labor back in after the next election. that's the guarantee, because there's no guarantees they can put in place, because the next government can change everything. And I don't know what, sometimes the journalist will set up a question because they're looking for an answer. I don't know what answer was being looked for there, because everyone knows there's no guarantees. The only guarantee to keep that funding in place is Labor being the next government. That should be his answer. But unfortunately, and I'll tell you something about Willie Jackson shortly, that is not the answer that Willie Jackson gives.
One would hope that your mates in National will act responsibly if we have a change of government.
That's the guarantee. One would hope.
If we have a change of government in 6 years.
The guarantee, though, is...
so if we have a change of government in 6 years.
I'll give you that one.
Okay.
So there you go. So that's the answer. The answer is, what's the guarantee? The guarantee. See, every time I see him, I get Willie on this face, because at the end of every sentence he goes, the guarantee to keep that funding in place is a Labor-led government. That's the guarantee. Other than that, there is none. And finally, Jack Tame asked him about the merger and why there was a big rush to make this merger happen.
What's the rush?
The rush for
passing this?
Because, as you know, the world is changing. We've got declining revenue. We've got declining audiences. In terms of TVNZ going forward, I mean, this is probably, things might not be sustainable unless we invest now. And we have, look, you could end up being the front man for Treasure Island. You might not be. I mean, you might end up there, because there might be no Q&A the way that we're going, because the audiences are declining, the revenue is declining. We have to.
I'm not saying this is the case, but I have seen some commentary over the weekend where some were saying, was it a veiled threat? Talking about Q&A not being here anymore. Like, I don't think it is. But again, pretty sloppy use of words, like I just did then, by Minister Jackson.
But you know how complex this is, right?
We have to invest in a public media entity, which is TVNZ and RNZ, and we think it's a good idea. So do many people in terms of the industry, and it's worth the investment.
But people think the concept in the broadest form is a good idea. but they're concerned about all of the detail.
Yeah, well,
Again, I'm going to go back to Koitu. We're concerned that this bill, which will be a cornerstone for the sector for some decades, is so incomplete and raises so many issues, it would be unsafe to enact it in its present form. You know how complex this area is. Why not take just a little bit longer to make sure you get all the details right?
We believe in a strong public media entity. That's what we want. We want something like the ABC.
I know, but you haven't answered my question.
No, I'm telling you.
So why not take longer to make sure you get that right?
I'm answering your question. We've been working on this for some time. We want a BBC, we want an ABC, we want a protection of New Zealand media, we want a New Zealand voice out there. We want New Zealand stories, we want Māori stories, Pacifica stories, Asian stories, and we want shows like this to be focused on. And it's urgent, given the way the world is working in terms of media. The whole media landscape has changed here.
No, I understand that, which is all the more reason to make sure you get the details exactly right.
If you wait and wait and wait, I think we've got the goodwill of a lot of the public. I feel that when we're out there, we've got supporters, people like you, of course, a bit disappointing.
So time frame. Committee reports back January.
There you go. Yeah, we'll leave it there. So it was a little bit awkward, him kind of talking about how bad the questions were. I'll let you know something to do with Willie Jackson in a second. Sai says, unfortunately, Jack has a naive view on the world. Peter says he should show that he cares, but you are right about how impossible it is to deal with the disillusioned. Other people say, yes, for sure, Pat, look at those MAGA groupies, and says he's lost his cool. I won't say who, and perhaps this is a little bit inappropriate for me to share. So come closer to the mic, come closer to the speakers, and I'll tell you. Let me say this. I had a very long, very in-depth conversation with someone once who worked very closely with Willie Jackson, not when he was in Parliament, but when he was in broadcasting. And the opinion of this person, so this secondhand, but it's of this person, was in that time, and I think he used, which sounds horrible, but if he didn't use this phrase, this is what he was saying, that Willie Jackson was punching well above his weight when it came to the kinds of jobs and responsibility he had been given. Now, if that's the case, I watch that kind of interview and I think maybe he's a little bit out of his depth. Maybe. Very, very clearly, this I won't say who it was. I probably could say it wouldn't matter if I said who it was, but it doesn't matter. But someone who worked on a daily basis with him in broadcasting, and was of the opinion that was his equal, that was of the opinion that he'd done maybe better for himself than his skill set and intellect would allow him to. I don't know Willie personally. I've never met him, never spoken to him. Don't want to cast aspersions against him, which I guess is kind of what I'm doing. I'm just passing on the information that when someone who was involved in Willie's life professionally daily says that about him, and then I see that kind of interview, I just wonder if he's a bit out of his depth. That's all. And maybe the reason he's the Minister for Broadcasting was he did radio and talkback for a while, which, as you know, if I can do it, anyone can do it. All right. Now, last thing for the night, and I'm sorry I've taken a bit longer to get to it. I see some people have kind of probably come and gone looking for the Kanye story. But if you are watching for the Kanye story, here it is. Let's have a look at what happened with Kanye over the weekend. Of course, this is just a TVNZ kind of synopsis of the whole thing. I'm not going to read the whole thing out because we'll get to the point I'm trying to make. Twitter has suspended rapper Kanye, or Ye, after he tweeted a picture of a swastika merged with the Star of David. I've got the tweet there for you, and I think it's okay to show the tweet even though it got him kicked off because it's on the Times of Israel. So I think if the Times of Israel can share it, then I think it's okay for me to share it. So there's the tweet there. Someone's grabbed the tweet. Watcher.guru has grabbed the tweet and he showed it again. So that's the actual imagery there that was tweeted, right? Now, one of the things I want to talk about really clearly is free speech. And the reason I want to talk, when someone says to you, what do we say about Maya Angelou? Was it Maya Angelou who said it? When people tell you who they are, believe them the first time. So when Elon Musk says, I am a free speech absolutist, right? We all know that there's restrictions on free speech, and those restrictions on free speech, especially in America, are normally tied into, should always be tied into direct calls for violence. Right? Free speech is available, and free speech is, I feel a bit strange having that sitting right next to me the whole time. I'm going to get rid of that. Free speech is tied into the most abhorrent things, right? You don't need free speech protections for saying niceties to one another. You need it for saying horrible things to each other. Elon Musk made it very, very clear when he started off that he is a free speech absolutist. Now, unless you connect the dots, which are very, very okay and sensible to connect, which is in and of itself, the Nazi ideology is violent, right? So that can be drawn, but that tweet in and of itself did not call for action, did not call for violence. It was a horrific and disgusting anti-Semitic, revolting image that warranted all the scorn in the world. But if Elon Musk, and this is not my standards, this is Elon Musk's standards, if he's saying he's a free speech absolutist, then unless it's a call to violence, the most abhorrent things should be allowed. Now, I'm not doing this to defend Kanye in any way, shape, form whatsoever. I'm doing this, I guess, to start to look at the hypocrisy that is Elon Musk. Elon Musk wants absolute free speech on Twitter. What does he mean? What does it mean for fake news, hate speech, Musk, who calls himself a free speech absolutist, has previously claimed that he is, quote, against censorship that goes far beyond the law. If people want less free speech, they will ask the government to pass laws that come into effect. So he is a free speech absolutist, right, that wants Twitter to be absolutely free speech. Yet when Kanye does something abhorrent and disgusting, but there is no call to violence, right? There's the tweet. The tweet says, yay 24, love everyone, hashtag. It shows the mentally deficient man that he is, thinking he put that sign up, and but he hasn't made a call for violence. How this man who wants an absolute free speech platform can then ban him? It doesn't make logical sense. It makes sense to me because I think it's disgusting and you should go away. But Elon has said absolute free speech, right? I wanted to share with you something that I experienced. This is a picture from 1978. A guy called David Goldberger. David Goldberger, see all the Nazi memorabilia and stuff here? David Goldberger was a lawyer, a Jewish lawyer, who defended the Nazis' right for free speech. And in fact, it's a movie as well. Very famous case in Skokie, where the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, which is I think it's in Chicago. Anyway, in Skokie, Illinois. There you go, Skokie, Illinois. People didn't want the march to happen. So this Jewish lawyer, who was a free speech absolutist, an actual free speech absolutist, working for the ACLU, went to court for the right for the Nazis to march and share their message. That's what a free speech absolutist is. And the reason I feel connected to David Goldberger is he's been on my podcast. So this is now Professor David Goldberger. This is 1 year ago. Professor David Goldberger. And if I can go back to my notes, I'll play you this conversation, a little 60 seconds from this conversation where he is talking about free speech. And then when you hear the idea of absolute free speech, remember, this is not me defending Kanye. This is me going, if the bar is absolutely free speech, what the fuck is Elon doing banning anyone for putting up an image? That's what I'm asking, right? And it's not my opinion that he shouldn't ban him. It's me asking, if you are setting the bar to be absolute free speech, what the fuck are you doing banning someone for sharing an image? Unless, of course, Elon's fucked up. And Elon realizes that an absolute free speech platform will very, very quickly have absolutely zero advertisers. So all this talk he's been going on about very quickly is going to go away. And ultimately, it's going to be a commercial decision that drives Twitter, not a, quote, absolute free speech decision, which is, I guess I'm calling him on his hypocrisy. I'm sure Elon will get this. He listens quite a bit. So here's Professor David Goldberger 12 months ago talking a little bit about his Skokie case to me. Yeah. So what you're saying, to be clear, is that far right group getting a case for their freedom of speech is going to help that far left group when they need their freedom of speech protected as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, now look, I defended the Nazis in Skokie, or the right of them to have their, the right to freedom of speech in Skokie. And so I'm biased because I suffered through it, and I still believe I did the right thing. So you could say, well, I've got horse blinders on.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to me that it turned out to be an extraordinarily effective lesson for everyone across all political views, across the entire political spectrum, about the importance of freedom of speech. And I think that it had overall, in spite of the fact that it benefited a bunch of Nazis, it benefited the entire democratic process.
There you go. A little bit about it. Now, if you're interested in seeing that, if you're on the YouTube channel right now, just make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you have a look here, DOC, it's episode 181. Now, actually, in that episode, and I actually think now, unfortunately, I probably made a mistake. I didn't talk that much about the Skokie case, mostly because sometimes when I talk to people who have got dozens of interviews out there, I actually kind of choose not to talk about that big thing, because you can go see that anywhere. We talked a little bit about it, but probably not as much. That was at a time where New Zealand was talking about hate speech laws, and I wanted to talk to him primarily about hate speech laws. So that's what pretty much the conversation's about. But as I said, if you want to check it out for yourself, it's episode 181. There it is right there. Professor David Goldberger, the lawyer who defended the Nazis' right to free speech in 1978. So I guess I want to say this again. If you're a free speech purist, Elon Musk, that means really restrictions get put around people who make a call to action to violence. Putting up Nazi insignia is not that, unless it had words with it calling people to violence. So I guess what I'm saying, and make this clear, I'm not defending Kanye or that image. I'm questioning Elon, saying, if you are an absolutist like you say you are, what are you doing banning someone for sharing an objectionable photo? Like, that's the reason free speech laws exist, to be able to post, send, say objectionable things. You don't get free speech to call people to violence, but you do for these things. So I'm fascinated now to watch the story, especially I've interacted with someone who is an absolutist when it comes to free speech, a Jewish man who defended the Nazis for their right to speech in 1978, episode 181. And I'm just, people use that phrase dumpster fire. To me, it feels like Twitter is a dumpster fire on a rubbish heap that's on fire, being hit by a meteor that's on fire, whilst an atomic bomb is going off around it. So it feels a lot bigger than just a dumpster fire. Jayan says, I think Elon's not sure what he believes from one day to the next. Peter, actually, I was talking about the Blues Brothers just in the weekend, Peter. I hate Illinois Nazis. Stephen, it's a curious tale of two symbols together. It could be interpreted a number of ways, none of which is specified overtly. I think I kind of think it should be left alone. I don't think it's could be interpreted a number of ways. I think it can be interpreted one way. It's exactly, especially because you have to take it each, like, not in its singularity, but in the of all the information that he's been talking about, him being Kanye over the last few months, to do with his anti-Semitism. So I don't think that's got anything. I think it's clear what he was saying. But the point is, what he was saying was disgusting and repugnant, and he thinks he can bring some kind of parallel between, the virtues, quote unquote, of Hitler and the Jewish people and their suffering. He's nuts. Basically, he's nuts. I know that's probably not an appropriate thing to say in this day and age of the words we're supposed to use, but he's fucking mental. Is Kanye. Yacey will say Elon was tapped on the shoulder by Zionist Jews. Yeah, he probably already has. In fact, there's lots more out there about that. I don't really want to necessarily talk about that per se. What I wanted to talk about was, if Mr. Musk is really going to be a free speech purist, then this is the moment that you are a free speech purist. If you're not going to be it, then stop all the bullshit. about Twitter being a free speech absolute platform, because it's not. Because if you're censoring Kanye for doing disgusting things, then you're not, right? You're not. All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. If you're watching us, the numbers have been I've been watching them go up and down and up and down and up and down. I know that some of you have mentioned in the chat how many people are watching on YouTube. Well, you guys don't get it how many people are watching on Twitter and Facebook, but I get all of those numbers, and it's been quite a good audience tonight. So thank you. Appreciate you guys being all over the place. Whatever you're watching us on, subscribe to it. Then you'll get us when we're coming up, whether that's Facebook or Twitter. We're even on Twitch, but no one watches us on Twitch. Or YouTube, obviously. YouTube is the place to go to get all of our content. The clip I played tonight from Professor Goldberg is from my original podcast that's been going since 2018 called the DOC, or the Department of Conversation. That continues on. There's a brand new podcast starting up next year, which I'm not talking quite about yet, but I'm going to actually record my first one this week. And there will be a new channel put on the DOC YouTube channel, a new thread of podcasts. There'll be weekly podcasts coming out starting next week, of which we're approaching a whole bunch of really interesting people, including international people. I can't even say what they are because I'm not revealing what it is quite yet. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And always, as the YouTube kids say, like that feed. I don't think they say that. I should ask Emma. Emma will tell me. Like and subscribe. Is that what you say? No. Smash that like button. Help us in the algorithms. I don't know. Yeah, cool. So that's us for tonight. We've got a few guests coming on this week. Jeremy Elwood will be back with us on Wednesday night. Of course, Chew will be along probably Thursday, Friday. Reminding you that 2 weeks from today will be our last show of the year, which will be the 19th. You all must be here for that. If you listen to us on demand, then try and get here for the last live show. The last live show, I'm hoping, I hate saying this out loud. I shouldn't say it. I shouldn't say it because if I say it, it won't happen. Okay, I'll do it with my fingers crossed, then it might happen. I can't cross my fingers very well. Did you see how fat I looked in that video? What did you think? Did I look humongous to you? Or was it just my I'll have a look. There, where am I? Where am I? Where are you, big boy? Where have you gone? There. Do I look, you can be honest with me, do I look particularly fat in there? I think I do. I weighed in again over the weekend. I think I'm at 47 kilos, down 47 kilos, I think. It's a big fucking number, eh? Down 47. And I've probably got, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 30 to go. It sounds so large when you say it out loud. Can you imagine losing 80 kilos? 70 or 80 kilos. It's fucking ridiculous. Anyway, I will... good on you, Nick. Look at Nick. You're a beautiful man. Nick said noticeable. Problem is, here's the problem, yeah? Right? This is the problem. When you're really, 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 really fat, you don't like having photos taken of you very much, I'm being honest. And so actually at my heaviest, there aren't many photos of me. So it's actually going to be pretty, I'm not going to be one of those people that goes, oh, before and after, because there's not really any befores. There's not a lot. There's a few floating around, but there's not a lot. There's just a few. But there you go. I think you can notice today. I think I've probably put on about 12 kilos in my beard and taken off 40. I think it's 46. Is it 46? It's either 46 or 47. I was thinking that I might be able to get to 50 kilos by Christmas, but that's not going to happen. I was also hoping that we might get to 50 patrons by Christmas. That's not going to happen either. So anyway, what I was or wasn't going to say, I forgot that, didn't I? I just took myself away from it. Okay, so I'll say it with my fingers crossed. That's right, my fingers crossed. I might have a very big announcement for you on the last show. The 19th, Monday the 19th, we're going to come back and do the 19th. I think me and Chewy will definitely be here. I'm hoping Georgie Boy will be here too, but George has got himself a new job. He's working in media. And Stephen says, TV adds 10 pounds. Bastard. I think Georgie's got a new job in media, so hopefully I'm going to message him and make sure he try and gets that night off. Or if he can't get that night off, he at least gets himself an hour off to hang out with us in that time period, because it'll be great to have him there. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we will have a big announcement for you for what's happening with the show next year. Those of you who put two and two together might realize other things I've talked about tonight, and we'll see. That's all. I can't tell you because we don't know yet. And if I tell you, it definitely won't happen. So, I'm just reading the last of the chats before I go on. Emma says the struggle is real. I'm on the using train or losing the losing train as well at the moment. Keep going. Yeah, I started on the 2nd of Feb. One of my talkback topics. I'm going to do some Today FM talkback over summer, as long as I don't get fucking COVID, which I'm trying to avoid now. Because if I get COVID, I won't be able to do the work. And one of my topics is going to be, because I'm doing it kind of from the 27th through to about the 12th of January, something like that. So, of course, when you do talk back in that time period, it's always like, oh, what's your New Year's resolutions? But mine's not going to be that this year. Mine's going to be, tell me about last year's New Year's resolutions. How's it gone? What have you done? And mine will be weight loss, even though that wasn't a New Year's resolution. I started it on the 2nd of Feb. And if I can be 52 kilos by 2nd of Feb, that'll be a kilo a week, which will be pretty choice. We'll see. All right, guys, you're beautiful. And I will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Just you and me tonight. I like hanging out with you guys. It's nice. You're nice people. And other than that, be safe. I went Christmas shopping this morning. If you're out there, I remember I used to go to St. Luke's when I lived in Auckland a lot towards Christmas, and it was the only time of year for you guys who aren't in Auckland. This might sound strange to you, but probably for the 3 weeks leading up to Christmas at St. Luke's, they have to have people in the car park directing people where to park. There's so many people shopping. So I thought I'll go out at 9 o'clock this morning and do a bunch of shopping, and the shops were empty. It was lovely. All right, guys, all the best. I'll try and leave this time. 3rd time's a charm, they say. Be safe, and we'll see you tomorrow night for another edition of our Big Hairy News. All right, team. Hooroo.